I need you to do something with me before we start. Just for a second. I need you to think about your voice, not the sound of it. I mean, the way you communicate, the specific words you reach for when you're upset, whether you use punctuation in text or you don't, whether you send one long message or 10 short ones, the way you'd word something to your mom versus something to your best friend. The inside references only your family would catch. The tone you use when you're being sarcastic versus when you're actually angry. Now imagine someone studied all of that, watched you for months, learned your patterns, your rhythm, your vocabulary, built a mental model of exactly how you move through the world with words, and then killed you. And then used everything they learned about you, your voice, your accounts, your phone, to become you, to send texts as you, to update your Facebook as you, to tell your mother you're fine as you, to answer your teenage son when he reaches out looking for you as you, and to use your stolen voice to make everyone who loved you believe that you had become the worst possible version of yourself. Unhinged, dangerous, obsessed, a stalker, a threat. That is what happened to Carrie Farver. And I have been sitting with this case for days now, and I keep coming back to the same thing. Every true crime case involves something taken: a life, a future, safety, peace of mind. But this case, this one specifically, involved something being taken that most people never even think about as something that can be stolen. Her reputation, her name, the way people would remember her. Carrie Farver was murdered on November 13th, 2012. And from that day forward, for 4 full years, the woman who killed her picked up her phone and operated her like a puppet, sent 15,000 emails, possibly 50,000 texts, maintained fake social media accounts, responded to family members, responded to her son, built an entire alternate version of Carrie Farver, unstable, threatening, obsessed, and presented that version to everyone who had ever loved her. And Carrie couldn't correct it, couldn't fight back, couldn't say, "That's not me, those aren't my words. I am not who she's making me out to be," because she was gone. So for 4 years, the world remembered Carrie Farver as a stalker, as a woman who abandoned her teenage son, missed her own father's funeral, quit her job without notice, and spent 3 years terrorizing a man she barely knew. People who had loved her started wondering if they ever really knew her. Her name meant something ugly in every community she had ever belonged to. None of it was real. Every single piece of it was manufactured by her killer. That's what we're here to untangle today. Not the love triangle, not Dave's nightmare, which was real and which was awful and which we'll talk about, but Carrie's story. What was done to her? What was taken from her? And why it matters that we say her name the right way. Before we go anywhere near what happened to Carrie Farver, we need to know who she was. The real her. Because the Carrie Farver that most people have heard about, if they've heard about this case at all, is a construction. A character that someone else built and wore like a mask. And I refuse to let that version be the one that sticks. Carrie Lee Farver was born November 30th, 1974. She was 37 years old when she disappeared. She lived in Macedonia, Iowa. And I want you to picture Macedonia for a second because it genuinely matters to this story. Macedonia is not a city, it's barely a town. Population somewhere around 200 people. The kind of place where the grain elevator is a landmark, where everyone's kids went to the same school, where you have been running into the same faces at the same gas station your entire life. In a town like that, your reputation is not just your reputation, it's your entire social reality. It follows you into every building, every conversation, every interaction. You don't get to be anonymous. You don't get to have a bad day without people noticing. Your name means something specific to every single person in that community, and that meaning accumulates over decades. Carrie had built something real in Macedonia. She was a computer programmer, and I want you to understand what that meant in rural Iowa in 2012. This was not a common career path for a single mother in a small town. She had gone after something technical and specialized and demanding, and she had built a career out of it. She was good at her job. She worked for a company in Omaha, which meant a commute, which meant discipline, which meant she was showing up every day and making it work even though her life wasn't set up to make it easy. She was raising her son Max mostly on her own. Max was 14 years old in 2012. This particular age matters, and I'll come back to it. And by every account, Carrie was present for him. She showed up. She was the kind of parent who was there. Her own mother, Nancy, described how Carrie had fought hard with her mental health over the years. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her late 20s. There were rough patches, times when she stopped her medication because, as she told Nancy, she felt numb on it. That flatness that some medications create where you're stable but you're not really yourself anymore. Carrie knew that feeling and she resisted it. But Nancy said that by 2012, Carrie had turned a corner. A real one. She was stable. She was happy. She was in the best place she had been in years. The work she had put into her mental health had paid off, and she was living a life that finally felt like hers. Her friend Amy Long said, and this is the line I keep coming back to, you noticed Carrie when she walked into a room. She had a laugh. She had a smile. She lit things up. I need you to hold that image. The woman who lights up a room, the mother who shows up, the programmer building a career in rural Iowa because she decided she wanted something better and went after it. That is who Carrie Farver was. Everything that comes after this is a lie that was told about her. And I need you to know the truth first so that when the lies start, you feel them the way they deserve to be felt. Now I need to introduce you to the other woman in this story. And I want to do this carefully because I think understanding who Liz Golyar was before any of this happened is the only way to truly understand how it was possible for her to do what she did. Shauna Elizabeth Golyar was born June 6, 1973. She grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. By 2012, she was 39 years old, a single mother, running her own small cleaning business. On the surface, she was friendly, outgoing, someone Dave Krupa described as fun to be around. She liked animals. She had 2 dogs, a cat, a snake. She was someone you could meet at a party and genuinely enjoy talking to. But underneath that, if you talked to people who had been close to her, a different picture emerged. Former partners described her as possessive, jealous in a way that went beyond normal, controlling. The kind of person who, when she decided she wanted something, or someone, didn't really have an off switch. Multiple people across different points in her life used similar words when they talked about her. That pattern is important, not because it's a convenient villain backstory, but because it tells us that what happened to Carrie Farver didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of something that had been building in Liz Golyar for a long time. And then there's what happened in 1999. And this is the part of Liz Golyar's history that most coverage of this case barely touches. And I think that's a mistake, because when you understand it, everything else becomes clearer. In August 1998, Liz gave birth to a baby boy. His name was Cody. He was 5 months old when he died in January 1999. The cause of death was determined to be shaken baby syndrome. Liz was in a relationship at the time with a man named Glenn Hare. Glenn had a history of learning difficulties following a childhood brain injury. When police questioned him, repeatedly, over long sessions, he was sleep-deprived and confused, and eventually he said maybe he had shaken the baby when he was playing with him, tossing him in the air. His family insisted immediately that this was a false confession, that Glenn didn't understand what he was agreeing to, that he had been pressured and badgered until he said what investigators seemed to want to hear. Glenn's attorney tried to argue that Liz herself should be looked at more carefully, because there was a detail that kept coming up. The night before Cody died, Liz called Glenn at work, crying, saying she had dropped the baby. Nobody followed that thread hard enough. Glenn Hare was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to nearly 9 years in prison. And here's the detail that Cody's biological father, Raymond Strahan, shared publicly years later. When investigators searched the home after Cody's death, they found a parenting magazine near the baby's bed. An article about shaken baby syndrome had been bookmarked. Raymond believes Liz had been reading about it. He believes she wanted to get rid of their son so she could have Glenn to herself. And he believes Glenn Hur spent 9 years in prison for something Liz Golyar did to her own infant. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because if Raymond Strahan is right, and I am not saying definitively that he is, but if he is, then what happened to Carrie Farver was not the first time Liz Golyar destroyed someone's life to clear the path to a man she wanted. It was the second time. And the first time, she watched an innocent person go to prison for it and walked away. That is who Liz Golyar was when she joined Plenty of Fish in 2012 and matched with Dave Krupa. Dave was a 35-year-old auto mechanic who had recently relocated to Omaha after the end of a long-term relationship with Amy Flora, the mother of his 2 children. He was upfront with Liz from the beginning. He wasn't looking for anything serious. He was enjoying being unattached, dating casually, not ready to commit to anyone. Liz said she understood completely, that she was fine with it, that she wasn't looking for anything heavy either. From almost the very beginning, that was not true. Court records later showed that from nearly the start of their relationship, Liz wanted more from Dave than he was offering. She wanted a commitment. She wanted exclusivity. She wanted to be the only one. And every time Dave made it clear that wasn't what this was, something in her went somewhere she couldn't pull back from. She moved things of hers into his apartment without being asked. She showed up unannounced. She texted constantly. Dave tolerated it because the relationship was casual enough that he didn't feel like he needed to draw a hard line. He kept being honest with her. This isn't serious. I'm seeing other people. I'm not looking for a relationship. And she kept accepting it verbally while not accepting it at all internally. And then in late October 2012, Dave Krupa met Carrie Farver. Carrie brought her Ford Explorer into Dave's auto shop one day that fall. He noticed her immediately. He said later that when they looked at each other, there was just something there, a kind of tension, a pull. He was at work and couldn't really pursue it, but he looked her up on the dating app afterward and she had a profile. He reached out, she responded. Their first date was October 29, 2012. They went to a restaurant in Omaha. Carrie was funny and sharp and easy to talk to. Dave's phone started blowing up almost immediately, calls and texts from Liz. He ignored them for a while, then texted her back to say he was on a date and would talk to her later. When he and Carrie left the restaurant and went back to his apartment, Liz buzzed the security door almost immediately. She was crying. She said she needed to get some of her things. Dave went down to the door. Carrie, being kind and low drama about the whole thing, decided to just head home and let him deal with it. She came down, past Liz at the security door. 3 seconds of eye contact, Dave later said. Maybe 3 seconds. Carrie got into her black Ford Explorer and drove away. Liz watched her go. And something happened in that moment that Dave couldn't have seen, that Carrie couldn't have predicted, that nobody in that parking lot understood. Because to anyone watching, it was just a mildly awkward situation that resolved itself politely. 2 women who barely acknowledged each other. A minor, forgettable moment on an October night. But inside Liz Golyar, it wasn't minor, and it wasn't forgettable. Something locked. Something she was not going to be able to walk back from. Over the next 2 weeks, Dave continued seeing both Carrie and Liz. He was honest with both of them. This is casual, I'm not exclusive, I like you both. Carrie was fine with that. She wasn't looking for anything heavy either. They had a good time when they were together, and she didn't put pressure on him for more. Dave later said he was starting to fall for Carrie in a way that surprised him. That she was someone he could genuinely see himself with if things developed. Liz, meanwhile, was watching, creating a fake Facebook account under a false name and using it to try to friend Carrie. Driving to Macedonia an hour away and spray painting Carrie's car while it was parked in her hometown. An hour away. She drove an hour to vandalize the car of a woman who had made 3 seconds of eye contact with her in a parking lot. This is the behavior of someone who has already decided what she's going to do. The stalking before the murder wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate. It was someone who had already decided that Carrie Farver needed to be removed and was working toward that conclusion methodically. On November 12, 2012, Carrie had a big work project starting, a week-long assignment that would require late hours. She worked in Omaha, but she lived an hour away in Macedonia, That commute, done twice a day during a demanding project week, would have been exhausting. Dave offered his apartment. She arranged for Max to stay with her mother Nancy for the week. She went to work that Monday, came back to Dave's place, spent the night. She was careful, practical, thoughtful. She had a plan for the week. She had arranged childcare. She was just trying to get through a busy work stretch without running herself into the ground. Tuesday morning, November 13th, 2012. Dave gave Carrie a kiss, told her to have a good day, and went to work. He didn't think anything of it. Why would he? She was still there when he left. Just a normal morning. Just two people doing the ordinary, forgettable thing of saying goodbye before work, like millions of people do every single day. That was the last time anyone who loved Carrie Farver ever saw her alive. We don't know exactly what happened on November 13th, 2012. We know Carrie left Dave's apartment at some point after he went to work. We know she never arrived at her job that day. We know that by that evening, something had already shifted, because that's when the texts started. What investigators believe, pieced together from evidence gathered years later, is that Liz Golyar intercepted Carrie that morning. That she went to Dave's apartment, or to Carrie's car, and what happened between them ended with Carrie Farver being stabbed to death. Her body was taken, hidden, and as far as anyone has been able to determine, it has never been found. The only physical evidence of what happened to her was a blood stain on the passenger seat of her own Ford Explorer and Liz Golyar's fingerprint on a mint container in the cup holder. A fingerprint on a mint container. That's what's left of the physical evidence of a murder. Liz also took Carrie's phone, her laptop, her belongings. And from the moment she had that phone in her hands, she started building the lie. The first texts went to Dave. Within hours of the last time he'd seen Carrie, messages started coming from her number. Angry messages accusing him of leading her on, of using her, of being the reason she was leaving. Dave was confused. This didn't sound like the Carrie he knew. She hadn't been upset when he left that morning. Nothing had happened between them. Where was this coming from? He reached out. She kept responding, getting more hostile, telling him not to contact her. And then, almost immediately after that, telling him she wanted him back. The messages were contradictory, escalating, and completely unlike the woman he had been spending time with for the past 2 weeks. But he didn't know that yet. He just thought something had happened that he didn't understand and that Carrie was upset about something. Carrie's mother Nancy got a message too. Her daughter told her she had taken a job in Kansas, that she was going to be in touch soon about arrangements for Max. Don't worry, everything is fine. Nancy read that message and felt something cold move through her. She couldn't explain it in any concrete way. The words were right, but the feeling was wrong. Mothers know their children's voices. Not just the sound of them, but the rhythm and texture of how they communicate. And this didn't feel right. She called police. And here is where the first, most consequential failure of this entire case happens. And I need you to really sit with this because I think this is the part of the story that deserves the most anger. Police looked at the situation and saw a grown woman who appeared to be texting, who had told her family she had moved, who had texted her employer to quit her job, who seemed, on paper, to have simply chosen to walk away from her life. Nancy's instinct that something was wrong was noted, and then set aside, because there was no physical evidence of harm. No signs of struggle. Just a woman who, by all digital appearances, had decided to disappear. So they did nothing. Or close enough to nothing that the outcome was the same. I want to be clear about what that decision cost. Because of that decision, that shrug, that assumption, that failure to look past the surface, Liz Golyar had 4 years to perfect her impersonation. Destroy Carrie's reputation, manipulate everyone who had ever loved her, and walk around free. 4 years. And every single day of those 4 years, Carrie Farver's name meant something that it should never have meant. Something her killer invented and the system allowed to stand. I need you to understand what Liz Golyar built after November 13th, 2012. Because I think most people here, she sent some texts pretending to be Carrie. And they understand it in a surface way. They don't fully feel the scale of it. So let me try to make you feel it. Digital forensics investigators later determined that Liz Golyar spent 40 to 50 hours a week impersonating Carrie Farver. Not 40 to 50 hours total. Per week. Every week. For 3 years. That is more time than most people spend at a full-time job. She was more committed to being Carrie Farver than most people are committed to anything in their lives. She sent somewhere between 15,000 and 50,000 texts and emails over that period. Investigators couldn't pin down the exact number because she was meticulous about rotating accounts, changing platforms, constantly evolving her approach. She used public Wi-Fi at libraries and businesses to disguise her location. She learned to hide her IP address. She got more sophisticated every year. The investigators who finally cracked this case in 2015 noted that she had gotten significantly harder to trace than she was in 2012 because she had been learning and improving the whole time. She studied how Carrie wrote, how she worded things when she was angry, when she was hurt, when she was scared. She built a psychological model of Carrie Farver's communication style and she wore it. And she made the Carrie she performed vicious. The fake Carrie told Dave she still had a spare key to his apartment and let herself in when he wasn't home. Described what he was wearing, what he was eating, what he was watching on TV at that exact moment. One text said, "I see you. You're sitting in your chair with your feet propped up wearing a blue shirt." He looked around his apartment. Nobody was there. But somebody had been watching. The fake Carrie threatened to kill people, said she had kidnapped Liz, said she was going to move into Dave's apartment building. The harassment was sustained, escalating, and designed to feel like it was coming from a woman who had completely lost control of herself. And the fake Carrie also targeted Liz. This is the piece I keep coming back to because it is so calculated it makes me genuinely cold. Liz wasn't just impersonating Carrie to mess with Dave. She was using the fake Carrie to terrorize herself so that she could present herself as a fellow victim. Messages from Carrie flooded into Liz's phone, threatening her, warning her away from Dave. Someone spray-painted "Whore from Dave" on the interior wall of Liz's garage. And then, in August 2013, Liz's house burned down. Her 2 dogs, her cat, her snake, dead in the fire. Messages from Carrie immediately claimed responsibility. Let me be very clear about what I'm saying. Liz Golyar set fire to her own home. She let her own animals die in that fire. And then she called Dave, crying and terrified, and let him comfort her. Let the shared nightmare of Carrie won't stop pull them closer together. She manufactured her own victimhood so precisely that the very trauma she inflicted on herself became the glue that kept Dave coming back to her. She also, and this detail makes my brain short-circuit every time I say it, she texted Carrie's boss to say Carrie was quitting. That part is already bad enough. But then, in the same text, pretending to be Carrie, she told the boss she'd be sending someone named Shauna Golyar to replace her. Her own name. Her full legal name. While pretending to be the woman she murdered, she used her own name and then went ahead and filled out an application for Carrie's position. I don't know if that was arrogance or delusion or some combination of both. What I know is that nobody caught it at the time, and that detail sat in a file for years while Carrie Farver's reputation continued to be destroyed. And then there's Max. I keep coming back to Max because I think he is the part of the story that is the most quietly devastating. Max Farver was 14 years old when his mother didn't come home. 14. Old enough to understand that something was wrong. Old enough to feel the specific, unnameable panic of waiting for a parent who doesn't show up. Old enough to read the messages his grandmother was getting. Mom moved to Kansas, mom's fine, don't look for her. And feel that they were off, but not have any framework for what that wrongness meant. He missed his own 15th birthday with her. He missed his grandfather's funeral. He watched Nancy receive messages from his mother's accounts while Nancy's face did that thing that people's faces do when they know something is wrong but can't prove it. And then, 6 months after Carrie disappeared, Max did what any child in his position would do. He reached out to her on Facebook. He sent his mom a message trying to find her, trying to get any response at all, trying to know if she was out there. She replied, "One message, I'm okay, I'm out there. Don't worry about me." That was Liz Golyar, sitting somewhere with Carrie's phone and Carrie's stolen voice, making a calculated decision to give a grieving 14-year-old boy just enough hope to keep him from completely falling apart. One message, and then silence. Because maintaining the fiction for Max specifically was too complicated, too risky, too much even for someone who was spending 40 hours a week on this. I want you to think about what that one message did to Max. One reply after the months of nothing, and then silence again. Does she not want to talk to me? Did something happen to her after she replied? Is she alive? Is she hurt? Is this my fault somehow? Did I do something that made her not want to come back? Max grew up carrying those questions. He moved in with Nancy, he built a life, he became an adult. And somewhere in his adult life, he had to learn that the message that told him his mother was okay was sent by the woman who killed her. In spring 2015, Sergeant Jim Doty and Deputy Ryan Avis at the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office decided to take a completely fresh look at the Carrie Farver disappearance. Cold case, 3 years old, no body, no weapon, no physical evidence of a crime beyond a bloodstain on a car seat and a fingerprint on a mint container. And they did something smart. They split their approach deliberately. Avis would work the case assuming Carrie was alive. Doty would work it assuming she was dead. They would follow both threads completely and see where each one led. It didn't take long for both of them to end up in exactly the same place. But before I tell you what they found, I need you to understand what those 3 years between 2012 and 2015 actually looked like. Because Liz Golyar didn't just sit quietly and hope nobody noticed. She kept building. She kept escalating. She kept adding new layers to the lie, new victims to the story, new chaos to distract from the things she had done. And by the time Doty and Avis opened that file, what they were looking at wasn't just a missing persons case with some strange texts. It was one of the most elaborate digital deceptions anyone in that office had ever encountered. They brought in a digital forensics investigator named Tony Cava. And what Cava found when he started pulling apart the digital trail was staggering. Every single device trace, every IP address, every fake account, everything kept pointing back in one direction, to Liz Golyar. She had been sophisticated, more sophisticated than the original investigators had given her credit for. She had used public Wi-Fi at libraries and businesses to hide her location. She had rotated fake email accounts constantly, creating new ones, abandoning them, creating more. She had used scheduling apps to send messages at specific times so the texts would arrive even when she was standing right next to Dave watching him read them. She had gotten more careful every year, learning from close calls, filling gaps in her methods, evolving her approach. But here's the thing about building a lie for 3 years straight. You get tired, you get comfortable, you start to believe you are untouchable. And that confidence, that feeling of having gotten away with it, is exactly when people start making mistakes they don't even notice they're making. Liz had been making small mistakes the whole time. She just didn't know anyone was finally paying close enough attention to catch them. The first crack? Investigators found a photo of Carrie's car on Liz's phone. Nothing unusual about that on the surface, except for one detail. The metadata on that photo showed it was taken a full month before police recovered the vehicle. Liz Golyar knew where Carrie's car was before law enforcement did. Think carefully about what that means. This is a woman who told police she had only met Carrie Farver once. One time. Passing in a hallway for 3 seconds. They barely looked at each other. Ships in the night. That was her story, and she had been telling it for 3 years. And yet she had been to wherever that car was sitting. She had been close enough to photograph it. She had that information, the location of a vehicle belonging to a woman she claimed to barely know, weeks before investigators found it. Sergeant Doty said it directly. Somehow Liz knew where Carrie's vehicle was before law enforcement even did. That one photo changed everything. Because it placed Liz at a location she had no legitimate reason to know about, at a time she had no innocent explanation for being there. The 3-second hallway story started falling apart from that moment forward. The second crack. Phone records showed that someone had called Carrie's home number 6 times using a *67 prefix, the code that blocks your number from showing up on caller ID. 6 calls. To the home of the woman who was supposedly stalking and terrorizing Liz. I want you to think about that from the perspective of Liz's own story. She had spent 3 years telling anyone who would listen that Carrie Farver was dangerous, that Carrie had burned her house down, that Carrie had threatened to kill people, that Carrie was an unstable, obsessive, terrifying presence in her life who wouldn't stop no matter what. That is the person she was calling 6 times on a hidden number. Why? Why is someone calling the home of the person they are supposedly terrified of? Why are you secretly reaching out to your stalker? Why do you need to know if someone picks up at that number? Unless you already know nobody is going to pick up. Unless you are calling because you need to confirm that the line is dead, that the house is empty, that the woman who should be answering that phone is never going to answer it again. Now I need to tell you about Amy Flora, because Amy Flora is the part of this case that I think gets glossed over, and it absolutely should not be. Amy Flora was Dave Krupa's ex-girlfriend, the mother of his 2 children. She and Dave had ended their long-term relationship before any of this started. She was living her life, raising her kids, not involved in any of this in any way. And Liz Goliar decided to try to frame her for murder. Not just a little, not just a suggestion. A full, deliberate, sustained attempt to make investigators believe that Amy Flora was responsible for everything that had been happening. The harassment, the texts, the house fire, the shooting, all of it. Liz constructed an entire alternate theory of the case with Amy at the center of it and walked into a police station and presented it with complete confidence. She told detectives Amy had been the one behind the fake Carrie messages, that Amy was obsessed with Dave, that Amy had been the one harassing everyone this whole time and using Carrie as cover. She said she could help investigators catch Amy if they told her what they needed. And investigators, to their enormous credit, played along perfectly. They sat across from Liz and told her exactly what kind of evidence would be needed to charge someone, what the emails would need to say, what the IP addresses would need to show. And within days, emails started arriving from an account purporting to be Amy Flora, containing exactly that information, worded exactly the way investigators had described, checked every box they had listed. Investigators traced those emails directly back to devices connected to Liz Goliar. She had sat in a police station and been handed a blueprint for framing someone. And then she had gone home and followed that blueprint exactly, and submitted the result back to the same investigators who had written it. She had essentially handed them a confession and called it evidence. Think about what would have happened if investigators had not been paying close enough attention, if they had taken those emails at face value. If Amy Flora, a completely innocent woman, a mother, someone with no connection to any of this, had been arrested for crimes she had nothing to do with. That almost happened, and Liz Goliar was counting on it. But even the Amy Flora trap wasn't the moment that broke everything open. What finally cracked the case wide was something so extreme, so calculated, so genuinely difficult to comprehend that I have read about it multiple times, and I still find myself sitting back and just staring at the wall for a minute. In 2014, Liz Goliar reported a shooting. She called 911 from a park in the Omaha area, crying, saying she had been shot. When police arrived, she was on the ground with an actual bullet wound in her leg. Real blood. Real injury. She was taken to the hospital. She was in genuine pain. And she told investigators that Amy Flora had done it, that Amy had followed her to the park and shot her. Police investigated immediately. They searched the area. They looked for shell casings. They looked for any physical evidence that a second person had been there, had fired a weapon, had fled. They found nothing. No casing where one should have been based on the trajectory of the bullet. No witness, no security footage of Amy anywhere near that park. Nothing that supported the idea that anyone else had been there at all. The investigation stalled. The shooting stayed officially unsolved. Amy Flora maintained her innocence completely, and Liz stayed in the background, recovering from her injury, being the victim. Because that is what she had done. Liz Goliar had taken a gun. She had pointed it at her own leg. She had pulled the trigger. She had sat with that wound long enough to call 911, get her story straight, and perform terror convincingly enough that paramedics and investigators believed she had been attacked. I want you to understand the level of commitment this represents. This is not staging a scene. This is not sending a threatening text to yourself. This is not even burning down your own house, which she had already done. This is inflicting a real, physical, painful, medically serious injury on your own body in order to advance a lie, and then performing victimhood from a hospital bed. and then pointing the finger at an innocent woman, all while spending 40 to 50 hours a week being Carrie Farver on the side. When investigators started seriously questioning Liz's story about the shooting, she did what she always did. She changed it, added details, removed details, shifted the timeline slightly, remembered things differently. The story kept moving the way stories do when they were never true to begin with. And while they were watching her closely, Tony Kava was doing something else entirely. He was going back through digital evidence collected years earlier, phone downloads from Dave and Liz's devices that had been sitting in storage since 2013. Files that had been looked at once, noted, and set aside because at the time nobody knew what they were looking for. Kava knew what he was looking for now. He spent hours scanning through thousands of deleted thumbnail images, tiny remnants of files that had been erased but not completely overwritten, ghost images, digital shadows. Most of them were nothing: blurry fragments, corrupted data, background noise. And then one wasn't. A photograph of a human foot. The image was degraded, partially corrupted, recovered from deleted data. But it was clear enough. A foot, decomposing, with a tattoo visible, a Chinese character. Investigators showed the image to Nancy Rainey. They didn't tell her what they thought it was. They just showed her and asked if she recognized anything. Nancy looked at the tattoo. Her daughter had that exact tattoo, in exactly that location. A Chinese character meaning mother. Carrie had gotten it years earlier. Nancy knew it immediately. A medical examiner reviewed the photograph and confirmed what everyone already knew in their gut. The foot in the image belonged to a deceased person. Liz Golyar had taken a photograph of Carrie Farver's body, of her foot specifically. At some point after the murder, after she had hidden what remained of Carrie, she had taken out her phone and photographed what she had done, and she had kept that photograph on a memory card inside a device for years. And that device, that tablet with that memory card inside it, was one of the items Liz had handed over to police herself after her house burned down. She had carried the evidence of her own crime into a police station and handed it across a desk to investigators. She had no idea it was there. She had forgotten about the card, or thought it was wiped, or simply never imagined that deleted images could be recovered from corrupted storage by someone patient enough to look. Tony Kava was patient enough to look. When investigators sat down with Liz and laid out everything in front of her, the photo, the IP addresses, the fingerprint, the car location, the phone calls to Carrie's house, the Amy Flora emails, all of it, she finally admitted it. Yes, she had been the one sending all the messages, all of them, for 3 years. Every single text, every single email, every single fake account, every message to Dave, to Nancy, to Carrie's employer, to her own phone. All of it was her. But here's what she said next, and I need you to really hear this because I think it tells you everything you will ever need to know about who Liz Golyar is. She said Carrie Farver had actually committed a murder before she disappeared, that Carrie had killed someone, a man Liz knew, and that Carrie had approached Liz and told her that if Liz didn't help cover it up, if Liz didn't impersonate her and keep up the digital performance, Carrie would harm people Liz cared about. So according to Liz, she had been coerced, forced, victimized by the situation. She had been sending those messages for 3 years, not because she wanted to, but because Carrie Farver had essentially taken her hostage and given her no choice. Carrie Farver, the woman in the photograph, the woman whose foot was on that memory card, the woman whose body had never been found. That woman had been running a 3-year digital harassment campaign from beyond the grave and using Liz Golyar as her unwilling instrument. She also addressed the foot photo directly. She said she had found the image on an SD card at some point and had held on to it because she thought it might be important evidence someday. Just stumbled across a photograph of a decomposing human foot and decided to keep it, for safekeeping, in case it ever came in handy. Investigators listened to all of it, and then they charged her with first-degree murder. Shauna Elizabeth Golyar waived her right to a jury trial. She wanted a judge to decide her fate, and I think we can read something into that choice. A belief, maybe, that she could perform her innocence more convincingly for one person than for 12. That she could find the angle, the moment, the detail, that would create reasonable doubt in a single mind more easily than in a room full of strangers. It didn't work. Judge Timothy Burns heard every piece of evidence. He reviewed everything Tony Cava had found. Everything Doty and Avis had pieced together over months of careful investigation. Everything the digital trail revealed about 3 years of calculated, sustained, methodical deception. On May 24, 2017, 4.5 years after Carrie Farver walked out of Dave Krupa's apartment for the last time, Judge Timothy Burns found Shauna Elizabeth Golyar guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree arson. And at sentencing, he said something that I have read so many times since I started researching this case, and it still hits me every single time. He looked at Liz Golyar and he said, "Carrie Farver did not voluntarily disappear and drop off the face of the earth. Very sadly, she was murdered." That sentence matters more than it might seem, because for 4.5 years the official record had been ambiguous. Carrie had been a missing person, a woman who apparently walked away, an unstable ex who couldn't let go and then vanished. And in that one moment in a Douglas County courtroom, a judge said out loud, on the record, officially, permanently, what Nancy had known since the first message arrived that felt wrong, what Max had felt in his bones every single day since his mother didn't come home. She was murdered. She didn't leave. She was taken. Liz Golyar was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Carrie Farver, plus an additional consecutive 18 to 20 years for the arson that killed her own pets. She appealed. The Nebraska Supreme Court reviewed the entire case and unanimously upheld the conviction in 2018. Every argument her attorneys put forward was rejected. Every claim she made was dismissed. The conviction stood. She remains at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. She is there right now today as you watch this. And she still, to this day, years after her conviction was upheld by the state's highest court, maintains her innocence. Still says Carrie made her do it. Still telling that story to anyone who will give her an audience. I genuinely don't know who is still listening. Carrie Farver's body has never been found. I want you to sit with that because I think it gets lost in the momentum of the investigation and the conviction and the appeal and the resolution. The case is solved. The killer is in prison. Justice was served. And there is no grave. Nancy Rainey cannot visit a cemetery. She cannot stand somewhere and know that her daughter is there. Max, who grew up carrying questions he couldn't answer, who became an adult without his mother, cannot go somewhere and feel close to her in the physical world. That is what is left. One deleted image of one body part, recovered by a forensic investigator patient enough to scan thousands of thumbnail ghosts looking for anything at all, confirmed by a mother who recognized her daughter's tattoo. That was enough. It had to be enough. It was all there was. There is a scholarship fund now, the Carrie Farver Memorial Scholarship at Iowa Western Community College. It supports students pursuing careers in information technology. Her field, the career she had built from scratch in a small rural Iowa town, when nothing about her circumstances made it easy. Her family created it so that Carrie's name would be attached to something that builds futures, so that when people searched her name, they would find something that reflected who she actually was, not who 4 years of fake texts had made her out to be. I think about that scholarship every time I think about this case, because it is the most direct, most deliberate, most powerful rebuttal to everything Liz Golyar spent 4 years trying to do. Liz tried to make Carrie's name mean something ugly, something that made people uncomfortable, something that made even people who had loved her start to wonder. And her family put her name on a scholarship. They made it mean something that helps people, something that lasts, something Liz Golyar cannot touch from a prison cell in Nebraska. Here's where I land on all of this, and I want to be honest about how complicated that landing is. Liz Golyar is in prison. The right person was convicted. Doty and Avis and Cava deserve enormous credit for what they built. A murder conviction with no body, no weapon, no eyewitness, constructed entirely from digital forensics and deleted thumbnails, and the patient refusal to let a cold case stay cold. That is genuinely remarkable investigative work, and I do not want to minimize it. But I cannot stop thinking about the first round of investigators, the ones who looked at this case in 2012 and essentially shrugged. Who saw a grown woman apparently texting and decided she had chosen to disappear? Who received Nancy Rainey's report, a mother saying something is wrong, this doesn't sound like my daughter, the feeling is wrong, and noted it and set it aside because there was no physical evidence of harm? I understand why they made that call. Adult missing persons cases are complicated. People do walk away from their lives. There was no body, no blood visible, no signs of struggle at the scene. On paper, everything looked like a woman who had made choices. But Nancy knew. She knew from the first message. And nobody took that seriously enough. Because of that failure, that single decision to look at the surface and not past it, Liz Golyar had 3 more years. 3 more years to learn, to adapt, to cover her tracks, to burn her house down, to shoot herself in the leg, to try to frame 2 different innocent women for crimes she committed. 3 more years of Carrie Farver being called dangerous and unstable in official records and community conversations and news coverage. 3 more years of Max not knowing. What would have happened if someone had pushed harder in 2012? If the fingerprint in the mint container had been run immediately? If the phone records had been pulled in those first weeks? If Nancy's instinct had been treated as the credible lead it was? We will never know. And I think we should be honest about the cost of that. Not to relitigate what investigators should have done differently, but because the families of missing people deserve to know that when they say something is wrong, when a mother says the words in this message are right, but the feeling is wrong, that deserves to be taken seriously, not noted and set aside. Taken seriously. I want to end with Carrie. Not with the investigation, not with the conviction, not with Liz Golyar sitting in a Nebraska prison cell still telling a story nobody believes anymore. With Carrie. She was 37 years old. She lived in Macedonia, Iowa, a town of 200 people where your reputation is your entire social reality and your name means something specific to every single person who has ever run into you at the gas station or the grain elevator or the school pickup line. She was a computer programmer who had decided she wanted something specific and technical and demanding and had gone after it in a place that didn't make it easy. She was raising her son Max mostly on her own, and she showed up for him. She was present. She was there. She had fought hard with her mental health across her adult life, and by 2012 she had turned a real corner. Her mother said so. Her friends said so. She was stable and happy and living the best version of herself she had managed in years. Her friend Amy Long said you noticed Carrie when she walked into a room. She had a laugh. She had a smile. She lit things up. Carrie Farver deserved more time, more years with Max, more mornings in Macedonia, more of whatever came next for a woman who had finally found her footing. She didn't get any of it. If you made it to the end of this video, genuinely thank you. This is not an easy case to sit with. It doesn't leave you feeling clean or resolved or satisfied the way some cases do. There is no moment where everything balances out and justice accounts for everything that was taken. What can be done, what we can do right now in this small but real way, is tell her story correctly. Say her name the right way. Remember the woman who lit up a room instead of the phantom her killer invented. Subscribe to Criminal Files. Hit the bell. Because every case we cover has a side the world never heard.